The room buzzed with an electric tension that could power one of Elon Musk's ambitious Tesla factories. It was a rare event, a meeting of minds so vastly different that the mere announcement had set the internet ablaze with speculation. Elon, the tech titan whose vision stretched to the stars, sat across from Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of millions, in a studio designed for calm discourse. The host, a seasoned commentator known for navigating explosive conversations, welcomed them both with a practiced smile, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. What could possibly go wrong when a man of science, driven by cold logic, faced a man of faith, rooted in centuries of tradition? Could two such giants find common ground, or was this destined to be a collision of cosmic proportions? Elon leaned back in his chair, his posture casual yet commanding, as if he were about to pitch a new Mars colony rather than discuss the soul of humanity. Pope Francis, dressed in his simple white robes, exuded a quiet dignity, his hands folded, in a way that suggested both patience and resolve. The audience, both in the studio and watching through screens worldwide, held their breath as the host lobbed the first question. Something about the role of religion in a world increasingly dominated by technology. Elon's response came swiftly, his voice carrying that familiar mix of confidence and mischief. He spoke of admiring the ethical frameworks religion offered, the golden rules that kept societies from crumbling into chaos. But then, he veered into dangerous territory, dismissing the stories of Scripture as fanciful tales, relics of a pre-scientific age that no rational mind could take seriously. The shift in the room was palpable. Pope Francis's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle sign that the words had struck a nerve. The host, sensing the brewing storm, tried to steer the conversation toward safer waters, asking Elon to elaborate on how he separated principle from narrative. But Elon doubled down, his tone growing sharper, more dismissive. He painted a picture of a universe governed by physics, not parables, a reality where miracles were just gaps in understanding waiting to be filled by equations. Wasn't it time, he mused aloud, for humanity to outgrow these ancient myths? Didn't the progress of science prove that clinging to such stories was a hindrance to real truth? The questions hung in the air, each one a dart aimed at the heart of faith itself. Pope Francis remained silent at first, his face a mask of composure, but the faintest tremor in his hands hinted at the fire building within. The audience leaned forward, some nodding in agreement with Elon's bold stance, others shifting uncomfortably as the tech mogul's words challenged beliefs they'd held since childhood. The host, sweat beading on his brow, interjected with a nervous laugh, suggesting that faith and science might coexist. But Elon waved the idea away, his smirk suggesting he found the notion quaint. For him, religion's value lay in its utility, not its truth. A tool to be stripped down to its functional parts and nothing more. The Pope's silence stretched on, heavy and ominous, like the calm before a storm that would soon break everything apart. What would it take to push a man of such patience to the edge? Could Elon's relentless logic withstand the weight of a rebuttal forged in faith? The studio lights seemed to grow harsher as the silence from Pope Francis stretched into an unbearable void, a vacuum that sucked the air from the room. Elon Musk, undeterred by the lack of response, pressed forward, his voice gaining a jagged edge as he dissected religion with the precision of an engineer tearing apart a flawed prototype. He spoke of Noah's Ark as a logistical absurdity, questioned the plausibility of parting seas, and mocked the idea of a man walking on water as something even his SpaceX team couldn't replicate without a hovercraft. Each word was a calculated jab, delivered with a grin that suggested he relished the unraveling of sacred threads. The host fidgeted, his attempts to interject drowned by Elon's relentless momentum. A freight train of skepticism barreling toward a destination no one could predict. Pope Francis shifted in his seat, the first crack in his serene facade, his fingers tightening around the armrests. The audience could feel it, a simmering energy that radiated from the pontiff, though his face remained a study in restraint. Elon, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the warning signs, pivoted to the broader implications of his stance. He argued that humanity's future depended on shedding these comforting illusions, that colonizing planets and curing diseases required a mind unclouded by superstition. His vision was grand, intoxicating even, painting a world where reason reigned supreme, free from the shackles of ancient texts. Some in the crowd nodded, caught up in the sweep of his logic, while others glared, their knuckles whitening as they gripped their seats. The host, desperate to regain control, turned to Pope Francis, asking for his thoughts on this bold dismissal of Scripture. The Pope's response began slowly, his voice soft but steady, cutting through Elon's bravado like a blade through silk. He spoke of stories not as literal blueprints but as vessels of meaning, timeless lessons woven into the fabric of human experience. His words carried a weight that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, as if he were addressing each listener personally. Elon's smirk faltered for a moment, a flicker of surprise crossing his features, but he quickly recovered, leaning forward to challenge the Pope's premise. He questioned how anyone could defend tales so detached from observable reality, suggesting that clinging to them was a sign of intellectual cowardice. That was the spark. Pope Francis's eyes flashed, a sudden intensity that transformed his gentle demeanor into something formidable. He didn't raise his voice, but the shift in his tone was seismic, a quiet thunder that rumbled through the studio. He countered Elon's accusation with a piercing observation, noting that dismissing the unknown with arrogance was its own kind of cowardice, a refusal to grapple with mysteries that science had yet to unravel. The audience gasped, some leaning back as if physically struck, while others sat up straighter, electrified by the Pope's unexpected ferocity. Elon blinked, caught off guard, his usual quick wit momentarily stalled. The host, sensing blood in the water, hesitated, unsure whether to fan the flames or douse them, as the debate teetered on the edge of something raw and unscripted. The studio air thickened as Pope Francis's words lingered, a challenge that hung like smoke after a gunshot. Elon Musk, momentarily thrown by the pontiff's sharp retort, regained his footing with a steely glint in his eye, his mind racing. To reclaim the upper hand, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, his posture aggressive now, less the visionary dreamer and more the combative debater ready to dismantle an opponent. He fired back, arguing that mysteries were merely puzzles, waiting for solutions, that science had already peeled back the veil on countless wonders once attributed to divine whims. His tone grew biting, accusing faith of stagnation, of holding humanity back from the leaps it needed to survive a chaotic universe. The audience felt the shift, a collective intake of breath, as the tech mogul doubled down, his confidence bordering on disdain. Pope Francis didn't flinch. His gaze locked onto Elon's, steady and unyielding, a lighthouse weathering a storm. He responded with a measured intensity, his voice rising just enough to command attention without breaking into a shout. He spoke of humility, of the danger in assuming humanity could ever fully grasp the infinite, a perspective that turned Elon's relentless rationalism into a kind of hubris. The pontiff wove history into his argument, reminding everyone of moments when science, unchecked by ethics or wonder, had birthed horrors rather than progress. His words weren't preachy, but piercing, each one landing like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through the room and stirring unease in even the most ardent of Elon's supporters. Elon's jaw tightened, his impatience bubbling to the surface. He interrupted, a rare breach of his usual calculated cool, insisting that ethics could stand apart from religion, that reason alone could guide humanity's moral compass. The interruption was a misstep, a crack in his armor that Pope Francis seized without hesitation. The Pope's voice sharpened, cutting through Elon's protest with a force that silenced the room. He questioned whether a man who chased endless innovation could truly understand restraint, whether someone so enamored with building empires in the sky could value the quiet strength of a community bound by shared belief. The accusation was personal, a direct strike at Elon's core, and it landed hard. The audience murmured, some in shock, others in quiet approval, as the tech titan's face darkened, his usual smirk replaced by a scowl. The host, sensing the debate spiraling beyond his grasp, tried to interject, his voice a nervous thread in the escalating clash. But neither man acknowledged him, their focus locked in a duel that felt less like a discussion and more like a battle of wills. Elon pushed back, his words faster now, almost reckless, claiming that faith's comfort was a crutch for the weak, a distraction from the hard truths of existence. Pope Francis's expression hardened, his patience visibly fraying, the first signs of true anger flickering in his eyes. The room braced itself, the tension coiling tighter, as if the next exchange might shatter the fragile civility holding this encounter together. The Pope's hands clenched, a silent signal that something explosive was brewing beneath his calm exterior, ready to erupt and shift the entire dynamic in an instant. The studio felt like a pressure cooker, the air heavy with the unspoken promise of a breaking point. Elon Musk's last jab, calling faith a crutch, had ignited a spark in Pope Francis's eyes, a glint of fury that transformed his serene presence into something formidable. The pontiff rose slightly in his seat, his movement deliberate, commanding the space without a single wasted gesture. His voice, when it came, carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls, low but resonant, a controlled burn that made Elon's rapid-fire retorts sound brittle by comparison. He spoke of resilience, of the countless souls who'd found strength in faith when science offered no answers, when survival demanded more than equations or blueprints for starships. The words were a rebuttal, yes, but also a quiet indictment of Elon's worldview, a suggestion that his dismissal of belief revealed a blind spot, not a triumph. Elon bristled, his hands slamming the table with a force that startled the host, who flinched as if expecting the furniture to splinter. The tech mogul's composure was slipping, his voice rising, sharp and defensive, as he countered that progress, not prayer, had lifted humanity from the mud. He painted a vivid picture of a species clawing its way to the cosmos, fueled by ingenuity, not divine handouts, his passion bordering on desperation as he tried to wrestle the narrative back. The audience was split, some nodding fiercely, captivated by his fervor, others recoiling at the raw edge in his tone, a hint of anger that felt less controlled than usual. Pope Francis watched, his silence now a weapon, letting Elon's outburst echo unanswered, amplifying its recklessness in the stillness that followed. Then the Pope struck. His response was slow, deliberate, each word chosen with the precision of a sculptor chiseling stone. He questioned Elon's obsession with escaping Earth, asking what it said about a man who'd rather flee to Mars than tend to the world he'd been given. The accusation was subtle but devastating, peeling back the layers of Elon's grandiosity to expose a vulnerability he rarely showed. The room went quiet, the audience holding its breath, as the weight of the Pope's words settled over them. Elon's face flushed, a rare crack in his unshakable facade, and for a moment he seemed smaller, less the untouchable visionary, and more a man grappling with a critique he couldn't easily deflect. The host, wide-eyed, tried to pivot, stammering, about the balance between innovation and tradition, but his voice was a whisper against the storm brewing between the two men. Elon rallied, his tone icy now, accusing the Pope of peddling guilt to keep people tethered to outdated systems. Pope Francis's eyes blazed, his restraint finally snapping, and he leaned forward, his presence filling the room like a tidal wave. He didn't shout, but his voice thundered in its quietness, dismantling Elon's argument with a ferocity that left no room for rebuttal. He spoke of pride, of the folly in believing humanity could outrun its own soul, and the audience felt the shift, a tide turning against the tech titan as the Pope's righteous anger burned brighter, poised to consume everything Elon had built in this debate. The studio crackled with an energy that felt almost alive, a current surging between Pope Francis and Elon Musk as their clash reached its zenith. The Pope's last words, a searing condemnation of pride, had left Elon visibly rattled, his hands clenched into fists, his breathing uneven. The tech mogul's eyes darted, searching for a foothold, and he launched into a counterattack, his voice jagged with defiance. He painted faith as a relic, a chain that bound humanity to its past, and insisted that his pursuit of the stars was the truest expression of human potential, a destiny written not in scripture, but in the laws of physics. His passion was undeniable, a wildfire scorching through the room, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed he might reclaim the momentum, his vision too vast to be contained by the Pope's quiet fury. But Pope Francis was done holding back. His face, once a mask of calm, now burned with an intensity that made the studio lights seem dim by comparison. He rose fully from his chair, a slow, deliberate motion that silenced Elon mid-sentence, the sheer authority of his presence commanding the space. His voice, steady yet laced with a righteous edge, cut through the tech titan's rhetoric like a blade through paper. He spoke of responsibility, of the arrogance in chasing new worlds while neglecting the suffering on this one. His words a mirror held up to Elon's ambitions. The audience felt the sting, some shifting uncomfortably, others nodding as the Pope's moral clarity sliced through the haze of Elon's futurism. Elon tried to interrupt, his tone sharp, accusing the Pope of romanticizing poverty, of clinging to a broken system while he offered solutions. It was a desperate swing, and it landed poorly. Pope Francis's eyes narrowed, his response immediate, a torrent of controlled rage that drowned Elon's protest. He questioned the cost of Elon's dreams, the lives ignored in the rush to colonize, the hubris of a man who'd rather play God than serve humanity. Each point was a hammer blow, relentless and precise, stripping away the sheen of Elon's bravado. The host shrank back, a spectator to a reckoning he couldn't stop, as the audience gasped, some whispering, others frozen, caught in the gravity of the moment. Elon's face twisted, anger and frustration warring for dominance, but his usual quick wit failed him. He stammered, grasping for a rebuttal, but the Pope pressed forward, his voice rising now, a crescendo of conviction that filled every corner of the room. He spoke of faith as a fire that had outlasted empires, a force that didn't need rockets or algorithms to endure, and the contrast was stark, humiliating. Elon slumped slightly, his defiance crumbling under the weight of the Pope's onslaught, his silence louder than any argument he'd made. The audience felt it, a shift in the air, a realization that the man who'd conquered industries was faltering before a power he couldn't engineer his way out of, setting the stage for a final, crushing blow. The studio trembled on the edge of silence, Elon Musk's faltering form a stark contrast to the unyielding figure of Pope Francis, who stood like a pillar forged from centuries of conviction. The tech mogul's hands rested on the table, fingers twitching as if searching for a lifeline, his earlier confidence reduced to embers under the Pope's unrelenting gaze. The audience watched, riveted, as the pontiff drew a deep breath, his final words poised to land like a thunderclap. He spoke of truth, not as a formula to be solved, but as a living thread woven through human struggle, a force that didn't bend to the will of one man, no matter how brilliant. His voice carried a quiet triumph, a strength that didn't need to shout to be heard, and it washed over the room, leaving no space for doubt. Elon tried one last rally, his voice hoarse, claiming his vision was humanity's salvation, a lifeline to a future beyond Earth's limits. But the words sounded hollow, a plea rather than a proclamation, and Pope Francis met it with a devastating calm. He turned Elon's argument inside out, questioning who this salvation was for: the privileged few who could afford a ticket to the stars, or the billions left behind to scrape by on a planet abandoned by its dreamers. The critique was surgical, exposing the cracks in Elon's idealism, and the audience felt the weight of it, a collective murmur rippling through the crowd as the tech titan's grand narrative unraveled. Elon's head dipped, just slightly, a gesture so small yet so telling, a man unaccustomed to defeat, now staring at its shadow. Pope Francis didn't relent. He leaned in, his tone softening but no less piercing, and spoke of courage, the kind that faced the messy reality of now, not the sanitized promise of tomorrow. He painted a picture of faith as a force that had rebuilt cities from ash, fed the hungry, comforted the broken, all without a single rocket launch. The contrast was brutal, Elon's achievements dwarfed by the enduring power of what he'd dismissed as nonsense. The host, pale and speechless, watched as the Pope delivered his final blow. A simple observation that Elon's greatest flaw wasn't his skepticism, but his refusal to see the strength in what he couldn't measure. The room erupted in applause, some standing, others wiping tears. As the pontiff sat back, his point made, his dignity intact. Elon sat motionless, his face a mask of frustration and something deeper, a flicker of doubt he couldn't hide. The audience roared, not out of malice, but in awe of the Pope's victory, a triumph of heart over hubris that left no loose ends. The host, scrambling to close the segment, thanked both men, his voice barely audible over the crowd's fervor. Pope Francis rose, his expression serene once more, offering Elon a nod that carried no trace of gloating, only a quiet challenge to reflect. Elon returned it stiffly, his silence and admission of defeat louder than any words. The cameras cut, the debate ended, and the world buzzed with the story of a titan humbled, a moment where faith, not science, claimed the day, leaving viewers with a resolution that lingered long after the screen went dark.